Welcome to Kratom Sobriety, and this is a Wednesday special episode. I believe it'll be the first one in September, if I have my calendar right. And I'm with an author today who wrote this book called Kicking Kratom, A Complete Guide to Taming Your Addiction and Quitting Kratom. And the author is Nolan Sinclair. Welcome.
Charlie, thanks for having me. I've listened to your podcast for quite some time now, and it was one of my inspirations for writing this book. So it's really cool to meet the man himself.
Thank you. That's a very generous thing to say. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Nolan Sinclair. I live in beautiful, sunny Northern California, where everything is pretty much good except for the taxes. Could be better. So I recently started making videos about quitting Kratom, and I just released my first book, Kicking Kratom, and it's been an absolute ride. It's been amazing, learning everything that there is to learn about this community, and having gone through it myself, it's just kind of communing on this podcast and getting to know everybody has been amazing, because there's so many people going through exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a quitting Kratom story to tell yourself. Why don't you give us a little synopsis?
Absolutely. Like everyone else, I think it starts out innocently, and we think, oh, well, this isn't so bad. We see the packaging. We think there's nothing on here that says that it's expressly dangerous. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to lead to, thousands of dollars in the hole. It's not going to lead me to regret anything. So I was recommended Kratom by someone that was close to me, so I didn't do any of my independent research. And I remember taking it the first time and just going, wow, wow, I'm able to function. I'm able to go about my daily life without anyone noticing that I've taken a horrendous green powder. And that was one of the biggest appeals. I struggled with depression for parts of my life. So Kratom was one of the few things that when I took it, it was like it was almost never there. And I think that was one of the things that ended up being so dangerous about it. So, I started taking it, and like pretty much every other story on this podcast, my usage started to snowball, and it got out of my hands. At first, I was saying, I'll just take it today. And then a week later, I said, okay, I'll take it only 2 days this week. And then I said, well, maybe it would help me go on my runs. And the next thing I knew, I was like, maybe it would help me do the dishes. And it's these kinds of things and these rationalizations that led me to get too deep in the hole with it. So long story short, I became complacent with my use. I started hiding it. I didn't know who to tell. I was starting to experience side effects, and, realizing that you're actually addicted or dependent on something can be kind of scary, especially for someone who's never experienced anything like that before. Like we all have identities. I myself thought, I'd never get addicted to anything. I'm too good for that, And then later down the line, you realize you're dependent on something. You go, whoa. So that was the first thing that really scared me. And it kind of led me to just want to quit. So I moved to New York. I lived in Harlem, and I worked for nonprofits for a while in a pretty professional setting. And that was when I noticed that it was really weighing me down. So in the mornings, I'd wake up and feel like a wet sock. And then in the evenings, I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up 6 hours later feeling like a wet sock, because I'd enter withdrawals, and I'd wake up and I'd have to take more just to get back to sleep. So finally, I said, that's it. And it was probably that's it is something I said probably 3 or 4 times before quitting it. So I ended up coming up with a method that I think a few other people have had a variation, which is a day taper. So essentially what you do is you start cutting out your morning doses, and you end up quitting it all the way. But one of the reasons I quit in the first place at all is because I noticed that, I love to write. I love to write everything, anything. I love being creative, just getting it all out there. And I felt like Kratom was preventing me from interacting with real life in a lucid and kind of transparent way. And that was had a huge impact on my writing. I didn't want to play guitar anymore. I didn't want to write. So that's that short version of the story.
All right. In the first part of the book, you talk about it a little bit too as well, right?
Yes, I do.
Couple of things just to clarify. So you were one of those where Kratom was your first addiction?
It was, yes. I've been addicted to nicotine, but I never really got into the harder stuff. I always kind of said, whoa, watch out for the snake in the pit.
Yeah.
Like that is a big snake in a big pit,
How much were you using at your peak?
So at my peak, it snowballed to, 30 plus grams per day. So it was of powdered kratom. So it was a lot. And it really hits you when you see there's a tablespoon full of green powder heading towards your mouth. And you say, I've already done this 5 times today. And you think, that's when I realized that it had gotten way too far out of hand.
And when did you quit?
So I quit about a year and a month ago, almost to the date. I'd had a couple unsuccessful attempts before that. I tried this thing, I tried that, I tried cold turkey, and a bunch of it just didn't work for me. It was it was hard, it was challenging, but I'm really proud to have been off of it for a year, and my life is better in so many ways that I can't even begin to get into.
One issue I had with trying to implement a day taper, it was the morning dose was sort of the most important dose of the day for me. Like I couldn't get out of bed without it. I became so dependent. And then I found like once I had some kratom in me, then like my discipline to not take more, some days I might be able to maintain and with some kind of tapering plan. Eventually, if I had a little bit of kratom in me, it might end up I go on a spree with it, But how did you handle like the morning skipping that dose and staying on that path?
I know exactly how you feel. I get it. I was there. Become super dependent on it. You wake up in the morning, and by that point, all the kratom's out of your system because you've been asleep for 8 hours. So you wake up, and you're getting hit by this freight train. And the methodology in my head that allowed me to push past that was thinking, the longer I can go without a dose, the more my body's returning to homeostasis. And that's something I touch on in the book. And it might not be the most comfortable method of quitting, and you're not going to get away scot-free. I mean, you hardly ever completely do when you're quitting this stuff if you have a heavy dependence on it. But one of the ways that I handled it was by saying to myself, look, you're going to have to, as they say, pay the piper eventually. Something's going to have to happen. And what I noticed was that was what was drastically reducing my tolerance. And it just became easier and easier to stretch it further on in the day. And I needed that dopamine hit of saying, I made it to 1 p.m. I made it to 2 p.m. I made it to 2:01 p.m. And I think that's what helped.
Yeah, I think maybe delay gratification. I might be able to get through the morning if I'm going to get rewarded later,
Yeah, that helped.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the compliment. You said that the podcast inspired you in part for the book, but what else, like what came together and said, hey, I need to write a book about quitting kratom?
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm trying to remember which episode it was of yours that I'd listened to. I think I listened to the Quit Lit episode, and then I've really been keeping up with a few episodes lately. I know you just interviewed, was it Emily from
Yes.
From Quit K? That was a great one. Dr. Stanchu, was it?
Yes, Cornell, and I think you pronounced his last name correctly.
Oh my God. Yeah, I looked at that one and I went, I don't know if I want to have a shot at this, but there we go.
Yeah.
Props to him. Yeah. So your podcast was one of the things that I would listen to when I was quitting, and I'd really try and look for all of these stories that I could relate to. So when I was in the UK, I'd been over there for a couple of years. I remember it's illegal over there, so you can't get it easily, but of course the addict brain will always find a way. So I ended up having a delivery that I missed right before I was supposed to go on this 3-day hiking expedition. And that was probably when I was at the height of my addiction. So I didn't have any kratom. I had never been without it before. I was too kind of scared or afraid to jump into that pit.
Yeah.
So it was essentially 3 days of diarrhea on a mountain, which, I don't know how many people can say that that's something that they would enjoy, but I certainly didn't. So I remember getting home and taking it and thinking, man, this is kind of scary. So I went on some forums and What I noticed more than anything is that so many people that are struggling with this addiction are scared to quit because they're afraid of what lies ahead. It's like what you were talking about when you wake up in the morning and you're dependent and you're like, maybe I should just take a little bit just to ease it out. And I started from personal experience, kind of knowing what that felt like, all that fear, all of that discomfort and uncertainty. So one of my inspirations for writing the book was kind of to write something that I wish I'd had when I was quitting. So part of that was, I wish I'd kind of just had someone to hold my hand and say, look, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You're not a bad person for being addicted to this or dependent on it. You can relax. Secondly, let's figure out what to do about this. And more so, I scanned some of the literature. I was looking online for resources, and a lot of it was very sterile. It wasn't very warm. So you have, like the American Addiction Center. You have some other resources you can find online. And if you're a first-time quitter and you see some of that, you're like, oh man, this is scarier than I thought it was. So that was one of my big inspirations for writing the book.
Yeah, and I've heard this a bunch. Many of us kind of get connected to this community through Reddit, but there is some doom scrolling there you can do, and it can be overwhelming. So that's interesting. This podcast was similar. I was like, I wish there was a podcast, and I had a similar experience quitting booze, and I found podcasts very helpful. So that's a great reason to write a book. Thank you, because there's not great options right now still on quitting Kratom books. So, well, how has the rollout been so far?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the compliments. I'm not great at accepting it, but I'll do my best. So thank you for that. It means a lot. Yeah, I've got more questions for you than I can count, but I guess we'll save that for the end.
Okay.
Yeah, the rollout has been really rewarding, just from a satisfaction perspective, and seeing these people commenting on my YouTube videos and getting reviews saying this really helped me. And when I released it, there was no huge profit incentive. I was like, this is just a really niche thing that I'm going to do to kind of wet my feet and put something out there just to try it out and see what happens. And my only real intention with it was like, okay, I'll help some people, and maybe I can cover the cost of the software that I used to write it, the cost of production, and we're there now. So it's been great. And one of the challenges, I know that Emily from Quick K mentioned this on her podcast, has been advertising. So as she mentioned, Facebook won't allow you to run ads with keywords such as Kratom, which is a challenge from an advertising perspective. So I've had to rely on my YouTube channel so that people can find my work, and you're very gracious for allowing me this platform as well. So hopefully that's very kind of you. Yeah, it's unfortunate because some products that Facebook lets you market may be more harmful than just recovery manuals or quitting supplements. So I've always found it funny.
Excellent. Yeah, I wasn't aware of your YouTube channel. I just hopped on here. So I'll definitely put that in the show notes too. And we'll get the word out. More resources and supports, the better. I know you had an ally in writing this, Madeline Young, a master of public health. What was her role in coming up with this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do have a background in academia, but I studied English literature. So, and contrary to popular belief, I am still employable even with that degree. But so she's been a friend and colleague of mine for quite some time. And, my focus has always been on kind of airy-fairy themes and literature and philosophy. And this was not the first book that I'd imagined I would release. So she was so helpful when it kind of came to making sure that the book was airtight from a scientific perspective and from a research and literature perspective. So she has a background in medical sciences and some biology. And so, she's got her master's in public health, and just to help me edit it, and her experience academically and professionally was really helpful in helping me make sure that this was kind of a more or less bulletproof piece of lit.
Excellent. Well, let's get into a broad question here about the topic. What are some of the most common misconceptions about kratom addiction?
That is a great question, and there are many. I'd say the first is that it's not severe and that it's a non-issue. I think that kratom addiction has a tendency to live as a shadow. When you stack it up against what many people consider to be more severe addictions, like to heroin, to traditional opiates. And I think that's unfortunate, because if you really do go online and read firsthand accounts of people that are struggling with this addiction to kratom and they haven't been addicted to anything else, it can feel like the end of the world sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a pretty unhealthy misconception, because it kind of minimizes the struggle of those who really are struggling with this, and you don't want to feel like, well, I'm just a wimp, I'm like a spineless wimp. And then I'd say another one, which I'm glad you touched on so much, is that kratom is not addictive. I think that's a misconception that's been pretty harmful. A lot of people are out there saying that quitting a serious kratom habit is as easy as quitting coffee. And not just from personal experience, but I'm sure from your experience as well, you can probably tell that it's a tad bit more challenging than that. And I think that it's a harmful misconception, because there are people out there that are really pro-kratom for the right reason. But there are also subsections of that community that I think are, if not in denial, at least a little bit hesitant to accept that it's okay to say that you're addicted to something. It doesn't mean that it's the end of the world for the product that you're trying to peddle. It just means that you should probably look a little bit closer into the thing that you're taking.
Yeah. Related to all that, I think the one that's frustrating me the most is like, it's only user error about kratom. If you have side effects, you have a bad experience. I've heard even the lobbyists associated with say it's a form of self-harm. And I just think that's really pernicious to say. I know you're trying to make the case to regulatory authorities for the least restrictive framework to sell your product, but it just causes great harm to people that are having a real hard time with kratom,
I couldn't agree more. You put it really well. Pernicious is a good word to use.
How does kicking kratom differ from other guides or programs designed to help people to quit kratom?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I remember when I was quitting, one of the things that really scared me was the possibility that I might have to go to rehab, or I might have to check into an inpatient facility, which, by the way, they can be extremely helpful. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do either of these things. I've heard people come on your podcast and it's been immensely helpful for them. The resources that are available in my book, I designed so that you could have the best possible chance to quit from home, and the best possible chance to quit from home while learning about other resources that you have if that doesn't work out. Because I know that when I was quitting, I just went, man, I don't want to have to tell my parents that I'm going to rehab, tell, the people in my life. There was a lot of shame there, I think. But one of the steps of kind of opening up and beginning your recovery is telling these people. So that's something that you should keep in mind too. The book does still cover all the methods like rehab, inpatient, outpatient, the value of your doctor, and they're all very important. But one of the things that's great about kratom is that when you decide to quit it, its lethality isn't as much of a concern as it is for other drugs when you're quitting it. And I think that's one of the best resources that we have, is that when we're quitting it, a lot of it is up to us and making sure that our brain is healthy and our mental health is okay.
Yeah, that is one of the most favorable thing I can say about kratom is that, yes, when you're withdrawing from it, it won't cause a seizure. And it's not like detoxing from alcohol or benzos. And you don't necessarily need a medicated, medical supervised kind of detox situation. Those are maybe helpful, especially if you have a really bad high dose habit, or if you have a polysubstance abuse problem, you're coming off a bunch of stuff alongside kratom. But I liked how you framed your book. On the podcast, we try to normalize that some people need medicated assisted treatment, and going to rehab is also acceptable, but you can do it from home, do it successfully, and do it mostly without a lot of expense.
Yeah, exactly. It's good you bring up the expense portion of it. I'm glad you brought that up, because it can be very expensive to explore other options.
Yeah. Well, you almost had 100 sources in your bibliography. Anything that stands out as an outstanding reference material from that?
Yeah, I when I was doing my research for this book, there was so much that stood out. I'm sure that you've read through some of the scientific literature. You've had Dr. Stenchu on that talked about some of it, and what every single one of these articles will tell you is that more research needs to be done to better understand this drug, and I full-heartedly agree with that. One of the challenges with that, however, is that it prevents us from making it a true decision about whether or not it's right for us. So I think some of the most important research that I did wasn't through scientific literature, it was through firsthand accounts. And it really led me to believe that, yes, there's more literature, there's more research that needs to be done. And that's super clear. But there's enough information out there and enough first-person testimonials to draw a pretty clear picture of the effect that Kratom has on individual lives of those that are dependent on it. So I think there was one piece of literature that I stumbled across, and it was a study of, I think it was of participants in Seoul or in Malaysia. And it was a quality of life study where they were looking at the quality of life of patients dependent on Kratom. And the conclusion was essentially that it did have a huge impact on quality of life. So it was physical health, psychological, environmental. So I think that's probably one of the other really cool ones. Another really fascinating one was a study that's not expressly related to Kratom, but I think it paints a pretty cool picture. Is there was a study that was done in Britain on rats, and it was a pretty, if I'm honest, I think that if this study were done now, they wouldn't have allowed it to be done.
Okay.
But the researchers got the rats addicted to cocaine, and eventually they set it up so that the rats had to shock themselves in order to administer it. Now, what this shows us is that the rats, and, as research has shown, human beings will engage in addictive behavior even though it's harmful. So I think that was really helpful for kind of understanding addiction, is that sometimes it feels like it's out of our control. And we'll keep shocking ourselves in order to get the Kratom.
I think one obstacle people have is there's this debate within ourselves. Is this good? Is this bad? People can get stuck in that debate within themselves for a long time. And it even seems like that's reflected in the scientific literature too,
Absolutely.
So, well, in your book, you discuss both physical and mental challenges. I'll call it the body quit and the mental quit. Which do you think is harder to overcome and why?
Yeah. So in terms of overcoming either of them, neither are particularly fun. I think we can both agree on that. But I'd say the one that's harder to deal with are the mental symptoms, the psychological symptoms. So the mental quit portion of my book takes up quite a few more pages than the physical, and there's a couple reasons for this. I think that in daily life, the head is where the hurt kind of tends to happen the most, whether it be emotional responses to things, addictive responses to things. Up in our heads is where we deal with it all. And we can't necessarily escape from that unless we deal with all of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, addictions, and habits, which can be pretty challenging. So the mental quit is hard for a couple different reasons. So number one is that you're removing this kind of psychological blanket that you believed was keeping you safe, and that can tend to promote fear. So we all have this idea that Kratom is the thing that's been saving us for so long, and that quitting is removing this blanket, and who knows what's going to happen when we're left out in the cold. Mm-hmm. So the mental effects of that are pretty can be uncomfortable, and it's the feeling that there's a large part of your brain that you are directly fighting when you're quitting. It's as if this semi-autonomous section of it has branched off and is now kind of attacking or belittling the part of you that does want to quit. And I think that's so challenging. Lastly, I think one of the hardest things to do is being comfortable in your own head while there's all of this discomfort and discomforting thoughts. I think that mental health is super important, whether or not you are quitting Kratom. And I think when you are quitting Kratom, it can be quite a bit more difficult to get a handle on. So there's a lot of tools and tricks and tips out there.
Yeah, in your book, you have a whole chapter section called the mental quit, and that drew my attention. And I think that the psychological part is the hardest, at least for me. But Can you walk us through the methods you recommend for managing cravings during the quitting process?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to know what you're getting into before you quit. It can be really helpful knowing which resources to turn to, what tricks, kind of tactics work best for you. So first of all, you need to be a kind of Swiss Army knife. You can't just, lay under your covers and then hope that it's going to get better. It does take a significant amount of work, but that doesn't mean that work isn't rewarding. So, for example, exercise, as many other people have suggested, is extremely helpful. It's essentially like natural kratom. You're replacing all of these endorphins. It's one of the most helpful things that you can employ, but on its own, it's not going to get the job done. So this is where supplements come in, for example. There's so many good ones out there. There's a section of the book on that. I know if you have a chance, go and listen to the previous podcast where Emily, I think she talked about some of them in detail. I don't know too much about the product, but I think that was a pretty in-depth discussion, right?
Yes, we talked about her product, and then we talked about the individual supplements, the main ones, and then which many of them are in your book too.
Oh, good. And then one thing I know that you love talking about is music. So this is something that not too much focus tends to lie on in terms of a solution to quitting. But there is amazing research out there. So there was a study that was done where I think 60 patients that were undergoing hemodialysis treatment, which is a very painful treatment for, I think, kidney failure, got to listen to 3 types of music. They got to listen to nothing, which I guess isn't music. And then they got to listen to anxiolytic music, which is kind of just calming, like the sound of the ocean and dolphins. I'm not sure listening to dolphins would be particularly relaxing. And then finally, self-selected music. And what's fascinating is that when they were listening to this self-selected music, their pain perception reduced by 60%, which is absolutely incredible. And it reduced their anxiety levels. And when you're quitting, reconnecting with your music is such an amazing thing to be able to do, because you kind of are able to step into this emotional world that you'd lost access to. And there's something else that I learned when I was studying psychology of music. It's called the Darling they're playing our tune effect. And it's this phenomenon that occurs when you're listening to music that is significant to your life in a marked way, or it's music that's connected strongly to an event in your past. So when you listen to a song, for example, it could be a song by The Cure or some other band that you connect well to, and it reminds you of a memory from the past. It's been observed that it plays this role of distraction by completely transporting you back to whatever emotions you'd felt at the time when you were listening to it in the first place. So when I was quitting, one of my favorite things to do was just put my headphones in and sit down and really connect with it. And it was distracting in the best possible way, because you have all of this physical discomfort, you have all of this mental discomfort that's going on, and the music is there distracting you from all of it. And it's a great way to get intense about it.
Do you have a memory from when you were trying to quit with a band or a song where this really manifested itself with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was walking through Morningside Park, which is just outside of Harlem in New York and Manhattan. And I was a couple days into my withdrawals, and I was feeling so bad. And I remember I was listening to Just Like Heaven by The Cure, and then a song by, I think it was Billy Strings, came on, which is kind of this amazing bluegrass artist. And everything around me just kind of became more vibrant. It's like this translucent film that had been in front of me for so long kind of just disappeared. And the music really brought me back to a time when that song had such a profound impact on me.
Yeah, I will endorse any set list that has Billy Strings and The Cure on it. So. Your book touches on the role of depression during withdrawal. How can individuals deal with that aspect of quitting kratom?
Absolutely. So I advocate for conventional medicine. I myself have partaken in the conventional medicine, but one thing that I'm very hesitant to accept as a treatment for depression as a long-term solution is kratom. So I struggled with it for a long period of my life. It's not a lot of fun. I struggled with bipolar disorder, and it's one of the reasons that I ended up taking Kratom in the first place. But one of the things I realized is that Kratom won't be there forever to catch you. And that's one of the reasons I strongly advocate doing your own research and finding alternative solutions for your depression. So it's like after a year off of Kratom, I'm happy. I have a stable relationship, a fun job. I get to help people by writing books and making videos. And this is truthfully a life that my depression told me I wouldn't have, which is one of the reasons I turned to Kratom. So it was kind of a last resort. But to fully answer your question, depression and anhedonia may find you sooner or later when you quit. And if they do, you have to power through knowing that it can and it will get better. Kratom is not the solution for your life, and it's not the solution for your happiness, and it can, in fact, turn out to be your enemy. But if you're feeling suicidal, talk to your doctor, tell your loved ones, talk about it. And one thing you can do to cope is remove the stigma around your depression and your condition. There's no use feeling ashamed about your state of mind. You're not wrong for being addicted or depressed.
Yeah, I've had mild depression in my life, and it's not fun, but I will have to say, and it's not to badmouth Kratom, but I had the worst anhedonia during my Kratom withdrawals. I was 4 or 5 steps down from my baseline. So not everybody's going to have that same reaction, but that is a potential outcome of using Kratom. And I have heard others say the same thing.
I can relate to that intensely, so much so. And it's one of the things that can get you through the quit, which I talk about in my book, is listing all the reasons why you don't like it. So, that gradual feeling of anhedonia that you get when you haven't had it, and, being constipated, less creative, hiding it, all these other things.
How important is mindset in successfully quitting Kratom, and what kind of mind shifts do you advocate for in your book?
Mindset is the most important thing. It's so important. It's, as important as coal is to a steam engine. So there's a couple things that may not seem obvious, So in terms of mindset switches, and I talk about this in my book, we all go through our lives, and there's things there that lay under the covers that we don't touch a lot. There's self-doubt. We're comparing ourselves to other people, where we've got, baggage. We're thinking, we didn't get that education that we wanted. Maybe, what are my aspirations? Where am I going? Am I ugly? Am I stupid? And I think it's no use burdening yourself with all that when you're quitting. One of the things you have to do when you're quitting is you have to find a way to leave all that baggage behind so that you can focus on your quit. It's not doing you any good. You have to care about your mental health. And there's a section in my book that I called the self-doubt dumpster and the thought swamp. And they're just 2 words I use for different kind of states that you might get in when you're quitting. And they kind of cover some basic mindset shifts that you can practice.
What were those 2 words, those 2 phrases?
Yeah, the self-doubt dumpster and then the thought swamp.
Could you just give us a high-level overview of what you mean when you talk about those?
Absolutely. So the self-doubt dumpster is when you're trying to quit and you feel like you can't do it. Everything's getting you down. You're thinking, how am I ever going to be able to do this? I feel like it's an uphill battle that I'm not winning. I'm not good at anything. I'm not smart enough. I'm not, intelligent enough. You have to learn to get a handle on that voice and learn that it's not yours. You have to learn that that's the voice of your addiction and your old you talking. So I think Alan Carr talks about this in some of his alcohol recovery books. You have to kind of brainwash yourself. And then the thought swamp is a similar kind of thing. It's all of these thoughts that randomly start appearing as soon as we quit, and none of them are much fun to deal with at all. You have to try and make your head a safe place to live while you're quitting, and not let that thought swamp or that mire of uncomfortable thoughts affect you.
Thank you. Yeah. So if mindset is you're thinking your way to better behavior, maybe lifestyle choices and routines changes is behaving your way to better thinking or a better mindset, or maybe you need to do simultaneously. So what are some of the lifestyle and routine changes that you recommend in your book?
Yes, absolutely. So number one is when you're quitting, try and get out of the house and get far away enough so that you can't come back. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have kratom at your house. If you leave for an hour on a walk through the woods, that means you have to walk an extra hour back to your house, and that means that you made it 2 hours without quitting. And for that last hour, you had absolutely no way to access your kratom. So that's kind of a fun lifestyle change that you can employ, or a trick. So just some basic ones that I think are really important. Journaling is so important. Meditation. I know a lot of the people that come on your podcast talk about spirituality or maybe their connection to God. It doesn't matter what belief system you ascribe to. It doesn't matter, which God is yours. What matters is that you're connecting with something greater than yourself. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. You don't have to think about it. Meditation is a great way to quiet down your mind. It's a great way to kind of try and connect with some sort of soul or spirit or inner help. Nature is amazing. There's plenty of studies out there that show nature is a natural antidepressant. And then one huge one is, I know you mentioned that you had a difficult struggle with alcohol. So you could probably relate to this, but it's, like replacing one addiction with another. So one thing you have to be really wary of when your new life comes around is that it's really easy to want to replace one addiction with another, whether this be through sugar or, a Reese's peanut butter cup is totally fine. And if that's your deal, then go for it. I love Reese's peanut butter cups, never given them up. But for example, I remember one day I was having a pretty tough section of my quit. And I was like, I need a beer. I need 2 beers. I need 3 beers. But the only thing that it accomplished was making me feel terrible when I woke up. It made the withdrawals worse. It just made it tougher to go through. And then lastly, a lifestyle change is you might experience something called the pink cloud. It's something that a lot of people experience, when they're recovering from kratom. And it's this sensation that your life is new, you're free, you have broken the shackles of your addiction that's not tying you down anymore, and everything feels fresh and alive. And one thing I think that a lot of people struggle with when they read about this online and on addiction recovery community forums is it feels like it's not going to last forever. And it also feels like there's something wrong with them when they realize that they're experiencing the pink cloud. So my advice is don't be afraid of the pink cloud and don't try and push it away. So when you start feeling all of these new feelings, like your life is amazing, you have energy, you have your libido back, don't push it away and sterilize it with a label or, a medical term, because the pink cloud is something that you can naturally learn to incorporate into your life as a stable and lasting feeling.
What do you think about the role of healthcare professionals? Is there anything somebody could ask their doctor to help them with, or things that the medical community should know about quitting kratom?
Oh, absolutely. I think I remember you had a guest came on. I can't remember if it was your previous one or the one before that, but they were, I think, talking about how they had a psychiatrist that brought them to doctors, and the doctors didn't really know what was going on. They had to talk to a bunch of doctors. I think a great way for the healthcare system to move forward is to just learn about it, because the more they know about it, the more they know what to prescribe and do. We don't want to, encounter situations where everyone's telling us to go and see a doctor, and then when we get to the doctor, they don't know what to do. But a serious piece of advice is if you're really struggling and you feel like you are, suicidal, or you're really having a challenge, go and talk to your doctor. Go and explore your options, and don't be afraid to explore, medicated assisted treatment. There's so many things out there and resources for you that the traditional establishment has worked very hard to create.
How about folks who have tried to quit multiple times and experienced a lack of success? They're very down, like this is an impossibility to quit. And it sounded like you had a little bit of that. You didn't quit on your first time yourself.
Yep, I've been there. I have totally been there. I think I relapsed maybe 3 or 4 times. And then some of them, I only made it a day and I didn't count it as a relapse. I didn't feel like I'd gone long enough for it to count as me even having quit. So my advice is that if you do relapse, it's easy to feel shame. And my advice is also that if you do experience that shame or guilt that you have relapsed, that is energy that's much better spent on your next attempt at quitting. Don't stop, don't slow down. You can absolutely do it. You have to double down. And in terms of relapsing, I think there's a metaphor that I use in my book, and it's about this whiteboard in this warehouse. And, written on the whiteboard for all of this time is 300 days since last accident. So all these employees at the warehouse have gone 300 days without an accident. Now, an accident happens because they've been 300 days without an accident and they got complacent. The longer they didn't have an accident, the easier it was for them to forget that that could happen. So I think, Charlie, you brought this up in one of your previous episodes and it stuck with me, is it's called the fading effect bias.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that, right?
Yes, and one of our guests, I think if I remember right, it was Savannah. She was the first one that brought that up, one of the first top 10 episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So why don't you explain the fading effect bias?
Absolutely.
Remind people.
Absolutely. So to my understanding, when we quit, it can suck. It can be very hard. And there's emotions, there's discomfort. We can do our best to mitigate them. And the further away we get from our quit date, the less we remember about the pain that we experience when we're quitting. So that's the fading effect bias, is that the further away you get from your quit, the more you're going to think it's okay to use just once. And I think that's something you brought up as well, as the one-time use fallacy.
Yes.
Which is not, it's not a good one.
What are your hopes for the impact of the Kicking Kratom book?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Initially I just hoped it would help some people. They'd be able to find it and just be able to read it and it would help them quit. But the more I think about it, the more I kind of see it as something that it helps with the division between pro-Kratom advocates and Kratom users that hate it and want to stop. And I think the reason that I want that to be one of the things that this book changes is because I think that it does no good to have these two sides fighting against each other. Mm-hmm. I think that the sooner that the pro-Kratom advocates can accept that it is an addictive substance, and the sooner that the Kratom haters can accept that there are people that actually, need it or that benefit from it, the easier it will be for everybody. And then another thing that I kind of hoped for it, maybe not in the general community, but just for the people that read it, is a comfort manual. If people are struggling, I wanted people to be able to pick something up and at least by the end of it feel like it wasn't such an insurmountable task to be able to quit Kratom.
So on a lighter note, we've already touched on music, but how about travel? Do you have any bucket list travel destinations that you still have that you'd like to, especially you're probably saving a little bit of money. Doesn't sound like you were going broke from your Kratom use. You were maybe mentally going bankrupt, but any places you want to visit?
Yeah. So, right in my backyard, it's not a huge aspiration. It's not, Ibiza or Barcelona, but in my backyard, there's a river that I've wanted to kayak for so long now. And I wanted to do a 3-day kayaking trip if my shoulders will let me do it. So just grab my kayak, leave for 3 days, bring my hammock, get out there and just be happy that I don't have to, bring a bag of green powder in the porthole.
Yeah. Well, probably if you're going to do it this year, got about a month left.
Yes.
Right?
About a month. Yeah. I mean, I just, wanted to ask you if you can recognize how much people are being helped by this, your podcast and the stuff that you do. Do you get to feel that and see that and, at least thank yourself for it? And your team too is so amazing.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for Jacob. He's been with me the longest. And then we have a couple of new co-hosts, Jasmine and Chris, who were also guests in the last quarter. But yes, it's probably the currency of podcasting, a niche like this, where it's a self-help endeavor. About every other day, I either get an email or I get a DM on social media, or I get a voicemail to our line where people are asking and just grateful. And so that is very rewarding. During my lifetime, I've done certain things, and this would be like in the top 5, like, okay, that was a worthwhile thing, so I feel lucky like that. And I do get signals that it's making a difference. Like your book is. The podcast was a little bit born out of that conflict between the pro side and the quitting side, because I was very naive, and I mentioned this a bunch of times. Like, I created a Twitter account, and I just started posting, like, I'm 2 days off Kratom. I got just inundated with people, like, out of nowhere saying it's not addictive. How can you badmouth Kratom? So they don't want anything inserted into the universe that there's negatives to it. And I was doing that in the first month of quitting. So you're already on nerve and having a negative reaction, and it wasn't like I just wanted these attaboys. And I had trouble quitting. I did not quit the first time. I had a lot of failed quits, and that was very demoralizing.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Anyway, so the podcast, it has been rewarding, and I do get some signs that it's reaching people. I wanted to ask you a technical question about how is it publishing a book on Amazon?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a lot easier than it appears.
Okay.
I think that's what's good about it. So Amazon, they allow you to essentially get a free ISBN, which is the barcode that's on the back of your book, provided that you only sell through them. So that usually costs, $145. And then the part that people usually struggle with is formatting it and getting the cover design and everything set up and ready to go so that they can publish it to Amazon. Because usually an editor will cost money, the front cover will cost money, this and that. But if you can get all of that out of the way, the process of publishing through Amazon is super simple. You upload your book, you create an account, you set the pricing, and then your royalties come back to you. I think it's 30% or something like that. So it's a cool process. Yeah.
And they print on demand, so they don't have an excess books.
They do. That's one of the nicest things about it is I don't have 3,000 manuals on how to quit Kratom in my living room. Not that wouldn't be helpful next time I relapsed.
Yes. Well, is there anything you'd like to end to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, Charlie, team, thank you so much for having me on. It's been so great talking to you. Super knowledgeable host. So is the rest of your team. It's nice talking to people who've actually been through quitting as well. It makes a huge difference, and you can kind of hear it in the conversation. And lastly, as everyone else has said before, embrace the suck. Absolutely. But again, thanks, Charlie.
Yeah, and for those who like to have something tangible in your hands, I recommend this book. You can flip through the pages. You can maybe even get a paper cut on it. It's a real thing, along with all the other resources, especially if you're a book person. Go ahead and buy the book. It'll be a good investment on your quitting journey. So thanks a lot, Nolan.
Of course. Thank you so much.